Well, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to the global launch of the Energy Institute Energy Barometer 2025. My name is Nick Waith. I'm the Chief Executive of the Energy Institute. I'm here in London today. We've got a really great agenda for you today with some excellent speakers to talk you through this year's Energy Barometer. This is the 11th Energy Barometer we've produced. I'm very excited that for the first time we're taking this to the ASEAN region. Of the previous barometers, 9 have been in the UK, 1 was focused on the Middle East, and this is the first year where we've gathered the insights of energy professionals, hundreds of energy professionals around the ASEAN region. ASEAN is a really, really important region in terms of the energy system and the energy transition. I have the privilege of traveling fairly frequently to the region and have learned a lot through those visits. It's a very energy hungry part of the region. The Energy Institute Statistical Review of World Energy just shows the pace of growth of energy in the region, and also how predominant fossil fuels remain in terms of coal, oil, and gas in the energy mix. So today's Energy Barometer gathers the views from energy professionals around the regions. We've had hundreds of survey responses. The responses are all anonymous and a mixture of quantitative and qualitative commentary that we've put together to really drive some insights. It's a really important work for us at the Energy Institute. It allows us to understand the people who are at the heart of the energy system, working across the energy sector day in, day out throughout the year. And for the Energy Institute, ASEAN is a really important and significant region. We've got some really strong ties, particularly in Malaysia, in Singapore, and with growing interests in other parts of the region, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and also a very, very engaged group, just technically outside of the ASEAN region, but not that far away, in Hong Kong, whom we're very proud of. We couldn't have done today's launch and produced this product without the fabulous support from our partners. University, Teknologi, PETRONAS. I have the privilege of sitting on the International Advisory Council of UTP and have visited the university, and we're really proud to be partnering with them. So a huge thank you to all of the academics, staff, and others who've engaged from UTP. The ASEAN Centre for Energy, ACE, in Indonesia, have supported us. The Malaysian Ministry of Economy, we're very grateful for their support. And finally, S&P Global Energy, who are a big supporter of the Energy Institute across many dimensions. We're very grateful for their support, expertise in bringing together a truly collaborative piece of work today. And finally, a big thank you to Melody Wong. Melody is the former chair of the Energy Institute Hong Kong Young Professionals, and Melody is chairing today's event. So Melody, it's my pleasure to hand over to you to talk us through our panelists today and the outcomes of this year's barometer. Thank you everyone so much for joining today.
Thank you, Nick. Hello, everyone. I'm Melody, Associate at Arab and also former chair, as introduced by Nick. I have a pleasure to introduce the panelists to all of them to you. First of all, Professor Kamaruzzaman Sopian, Professor of Mechanical Engineering, Universiti Teknologi PETRONAS. Before joining UTP, Sopian also worked as a director of the Solar Energy Research Institute, Universiti Kapasa, Malaysia. So hello, Sopian. And then the other one I would like to introduce is Dr. Lim Eun Sean, Chief Business and Solutions Officer at Aerodyne Group. Sean drives strategies and technology adoption across infrastructure sectors in 45 countries. Sean is also a member of the Energy Institute and also the chairman of Energy Institute Malaysia. Hello, Sean. And then the other one is Lauren Brzeska, Executive Director, First Take Gas, Geopolitics and Finance, representing S&P Global Energy, and is an experienced analyst of the energy sector, focusing on how politics and policy affecting investment. Lauren is also a leading expert on the natural gas sector in Europe and Eurasia. Hello, Lawrence. And then
Hello.
And then the last one, Kicker Nemesis, is a senior energy analyst at the Energy Institute. Kinga has delivered the last 7 edition of the Energy Barometer. So she is a historian as the lead reporting author too. So first, some food for thought. So I would like to pass the time to Kinga to provide us some of the insights emerging from today's report. Over to you, Kinga.
Thank you so much, Melody. Energy Barometer 2025 is divided in 4 sections, and I will follow that structure as I share some of the selected findings. So first, we will look at ASEAN energy professionals' views on the continued use of fossil fuels in the countries. Next, I will move on to findings related to systems resilience and regional cooperation. After that, we will cover insights on how to redesign energy systems, including what technologies are needed, how to boost investments. And finally, I will wrap up with views on how to support a just energy transition in the region. So first up, let's look at how our respondents, ASEAN's energy professionals, see the role of fossil fuels going forward. And this is an important question in general, but specifically in the context of Southeast Asia, as fossil fuels still make up nearly 50% or nearly 90% of the region's energy mix. 50% is something else, 50%, so this is more than half, so more than 50% of our respondents think the share of fossil fuels will decrease, though mostly only moderately. Nearly 20% think that it will stay the same, but 25% think that it could even increase. So we ask what's driving this continued reliance on fossil fuels, and the answers show a mix of economic and structural factors. The top reason are energy affordability and energy security concerns. Other important factors include infrastructure and technology limits, readily available resources, and according to our respondents, lack of viable alternatives. Respondents were also clear on how the fossil fuel sectors should adapt to a changing energy system. Most, nearly 3/4, favor diversifying into clean or low carbon fuels. Around 60% highlight the need to boost efficiency and reduce carbon intensity, and almost half of our respondents support investing in emission reduction technologies. Very, very few, 4%, want to keep operations largely as they are with minimal changes. And a very quick disclaimer here, our respondents were able to select multiple answers, so the percentages can add up to more than 100%. So overall, the same respondents who take a realistic view of fossil fuels' ongoing role also overwhelmingly support adapting the sector to changing world. So the message is pragmatic. Fossil fuels are not disappearing overnight, but neither should they remain static. Moving now on the findings related to resilience, stability, and regional cooperation. This part of this presentation and the report gives us a clear picture of how respondents think priorities around security, affordability, sustainability, and cooperation across the region are shifting in response to to global pressures. So when we asked our survey participants to pick the top energy policy priorities for their own country, one measure stood out clearly: financial incentives for clean energy, so like subsidies or tax breaks, which were selected by more than half of respondents. Next came more funding for clean energy research and development at 41%, followed very closely by strengthening energy infrastructure and fuel supply chain. So these were priorities for going forward, but our respondents are also concerned about stability of today's energy system. So the most commonly cited risk for the next 5 years was rising energy prices. This was followed by worries about exposure to energy commodity price volatility and dependence on fossil fuels, both at 30%. When we asked what governments should prioritize to protect consumers from energy price shocks, 3 themes stood out. First, respondents strongly favored long-term structural solutions. So the top recommendations chosen by nearly 60% was to promote energy efficiency programs across both households and industry. Right behind that, at 52%, was diversifying energy sources to reduce exposure to price swings, also, so at the same time, respondents also emphasized the need for short-term social protection. So targeted financial support for vulnerable households was selected by 45%. So overall, the message is clear. People want a combination of long-term resilience measures and immediate protection for those who need it most. How confident are the respondents in ASEAN's ability to meet its climate and renewable targets? So no, not amazingly confident. When it comes to next zero goals, respondents were almost evenly split. Just over half think that with current policies, the emission reduction targets will fall short. But a substantial 42% believe the targets will be met or even exceeded. A similar picture emerges for the region's target of a 35% share of renewables in the electricity mix by 2030. So again, caution meets optimism. 50% of respondents expect the target to be met or exceeded, while 46% anticipate it will fall short. So overall, there is no clear consensus, not a great confidence, but certainly no loss of hope either. And moving on to the regional cooperations, respondents clearly see it as critical. So over 70% rated initiatives such as ASEAN Power Grid as very important for the country's energy security and affordable energy supply. But at the same time, respondents flagged barriers to deeper integration and concerns around sovereignty, regulatory differences, technical limitations, and financing challenges were all highlighted as factors that could slow down progress. And let's move now to the section that focuses on the technologies and the investments needed to redesign energy systems for the transition. So as I mentioned earlier already, there's a mix of caution and optimism when it comes to meeting regional renewable targets. When we asked about the technical measures needed to support greater renewables integration, respondents highlighted several priorities. Energy storage came out on top at 54%. Followed by modernizing the electricity grid at 45%. Other measures also received strong support, including decentralized systems like microgrids, regional
very powerful research on external data. But I did have a fantastic example of it.
Thank you. Maybe you can wait for the comments and the questions after the presentations, but appreciate it. So as I said, the deployment of the centralized system was strongly supported. Next to it, support for regional grid interconnection, so next to each other, which I see as complementing each other, and flexible generation and demand response. A little bit, a slightly more broad question when we ask respondents to prioritize investments in technologies and innovations that are needed to support the country's energy transition. At the top of the list was energy efficiency and demand management, selected by nearly half of participants of the survey. Solar energy came in second at 37%, followed by energy storage, CCUS, modernization of fossil fuel power plants, and low carbon transport. Shifting to the obstacles to scaling up investment in energy transition, respondents highlighted several key challenges, with financial and regulatory issues topping the list. So the biggest concern, cited by nearly 70%, was high upfront capital costs, followed by regulatory uncertainty. Other barriers included limited access to affordable long-term financing and insufficient government incentives. And finally, for this section, let's focus for a while on the role of digital solutions in supporting a cleaner energy system. So respondents highlighted several priorities. The most popular was grid operations and real-time monitoring, followed by consumer demand response and smart metering, and renewable forecasting. And as the rapid growth of data centers globally, but also across Southeast Asia, is creating this new electricity demand challenge, we asked about that too. So how they could strengthen rather than hinder the region's energy transition. And respondents indicated key priorities for addressing this rising demand, powering data centers with renewable energy, stricter energy efficiency standards, and co-locating data centers closer to renewable sources. And finally, just one more slide, let's look at the social side of the energy transition. Our respondents highlighted the groups most at risks from the energy transition. Low-income households, both urban and rural, were cited by 75%, followed by remote communities without reliable access to energy, elderly populations, and those without or with limited digital literacy were also identified, reflecting a less visible but critical barrier, especially as energy systems become more digital. as I discussed earlier. Respondents also shared views on the skills that need development. The top priority chosen by 50% of respondents was engineering and technical expertise for energy infrastructure, followed by policy, leadership, and strategic planning at 41%. And third place at nearly 30% was shared between environmental and social impact assessment and renewable energy technologies. And this wraps up our findings. And thank you very much again to all those who completed the survey and took part in the in-depth interviews. I hope that some of you are here with us today. For the full report, please visit our website. It's energyins.org/barometer 2025, or scan the QR code, which you can see on your screens. Please read the report, but not before our panel discussion, for which I will hand it now over to Melody.
Thank you, Kinga. So before kicking start the panel reflection and discussion, I just want to ask everyone online to start thinking about any question that you may have for our panelists, or you have already got some questions to Kinga. Just feel free to post the question into the chat box and we'll come back to you later. Okay, so let's start by maybe asking each of our panelists for some immediate reflections on what we have just heard from Kinga. Maybe we can start from Sopian. Sopian, I think your work is majority is focusing on renewable energy, especially those solar technologies. And the survey just shown by Kinga underscores some of the important points, like technology alone won't get us where we need to go. What's your reflections on the report findings that security, sustainability, affordability are no longer separate priorities, but interdependent pillars that we must be addressed simultaneously?
Thank you. Thank you, Melanie. I think the barometer captures a very important reality for ASEAN, that I think technology alone is not enough to deliver the things that we need. I mean, especially the energy transition. The survey make it clear that security, affordability, and as well as sustainability, they are now deeply interdependent pillars, and we need to address all of them. If we don't address one of them, the progress will be slow and sometimes will be uneven. So therefore, let me begin with the energy security. Now, if you look at energy security from the traditional definition, it means that energy security means that enough fuel, stable, like stable coal supply, low price of fuel, steady gas imports, and of course, a very firm baseload, because most in our electricity system, there is a baseload and it's a firm baseload. But that barometer shows that the definition is no longer in our current context. Today, security means resilience, and resilience, especially to global fuel shock, resilient to extreme weather. And mind you that for the past 10 years, the weather in Southeast Asia are not that predictable. When I was a student before, I know that there is the monsoon from the east, there's the monsoon from the west. So I know when is the time for the rain. But now it's just unpredictable. So, and also we look at the resilience in terms of many countries are going into high penetration of renewable energy. But that also is not, it's quite difficult. So therefore you can see that while solar and wind and all other renewables can strengthen our resilient. But our grid are not that modern or flexible yet. There are some countries, for example, in Malaysia, from Singapore, and also in Thailand, that their grid are very excellent. Yeah, but it need to be modernized. So I would say that renewable energy will be not only it's now becoming a security asset. It's not just an environmental solution. So because we need to reduce our what you call dependency on imports. We need to stabilize long-term costs, and we need to basically give the country more control of its own energy. Now, the second pillar is that the biggest, I think, the biggest risk in the survey is that the affordability. The survey indicate that ASEAN that's the biggest short-term risk. Rising electricity prices and global commodity volatility will have social impacts. And when energy become unaffordable, the only thing the government will do basically is to slow down any sort of transition process. For example, energy, planned energy transition process or so forth. So because the pressure is always to keep the economy, that always is the priority. So affordability is not only now a constraint. It's not only a constraint to sustainability, but it's also a precondition. So, for example, now how we make solar to be cheap, to be affordable. For instance, in Malaysia, it takes like 10 years from the beginning of from I remember I was visiting the UK, and I'm visiting the UK, at the time the German and Netherlands to study the feed-in tariff. And then later on, the feed-in tariff was introduced for about 10 years, and now you have a competitive bidding process for solar. So it takes time. Yeah. But so it is now, maybe solar is part of the cheapest renewable energy resource in the ASEAN region. But you cannot fully benefit it unless you have some enabling to enable it. For example, some financing program, regulation, efficient grid planning, and also for some instances to remove some of the fuel subsidies. So without this, even cheap solar cannot deploy at a larger scale. And I think the next issue is the sustainability. Right? Okay, the technology that, the technology is available. Solar, storage, hydrogen, advanced cooling process, advanced renewable energy, and so forth. It's already there, and I think from the survey they rightly pointed out which are the best. And again, I think that it's not technology then; it's more systemic. That means that sustainability requires supportive policies, strong institutions, modern grids, and also, rightly so, regional cooperation. So it means that without this coherent system, even the best technology they will struggle, to achieve its full potential. So ASEAN in this case should have a systemic alignment, especially this ASEAN is about a country of 11. We have one extra this year who said actually who has applied to be an ASEAN member for quite a long time, and he even said that to enter heaven is much easier to enter to enter ASEAN. So, but each country have a different stage of development, and so my reflection on this would be that ASEAN must move towards a technological driven from a technological driven transition to a more system driven transition. Technology is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And I think what matters now is actually that how those things interact with policy, with financing, with market design, also with regional collaboration. I think ASEAN has a potential of a lot with regional cooperation, and it can be like it's like the European Union. Yeah? So I think coming back to the question of energy security, affordability, and sustainability, we cannot pursue that anymore in isolation. They fall and rise together. Yeah. So that's my opinion on that.
Thank you.
On that question.
So you get like a quick wrap up of what you have mentioned, that we cannot just like thinking about each of the disciplines like separately. We need to think like interdependency, and at the same time together with policy, subsidies, economics, markets, etc., to make things all happen. And then let's move on to the questions to the next panelist, Sean. Hi, Sean. The survey highlights some important and also some complex or regional collaborationists. So everyone wants to be more resilient with like the stable prices, like what Sopian mentioned, and of course like cleaner energy mix, but like different national rules and priorities like make it hard. From your perspective, like how can Asian countries work together in a more realistic or yet ambitious way?
Got it. Thanks for the question, Melody. Sean over here. And I think before I answer the question, maybe I need to preface a few key facts about ASEAN. The 11 country block of ASEAN. I think first and foremost, if you combine the ASEAN population, it is actually the third most populous nation block in the world, or group of countries in the world. And that really kind of underlines also the potential appetite for energy demand. And I will come to that very shortly about the mix of supply and demand in the region and how it's evolving between each other. Second thing, I think we also have to understand that how it is also very different from the typical centers of energy in Europe and North America, is that we have a lot of remote communities still unlocked, that still have yet to have access to stable energy supplies. If you look like island communities like in Indonesia, Philippines, there are huge, vast populations that are still locked away in that sense. Third most is that we are relatively geopolitically stable. And that introduces a very positive dynamics to the longevity of investments. And I think we will want to explore and flesh out these conversations a little bit down the line. But also interestingly, ASEAN is kind of home to one of the largest pockets of transition fuels, and you probably guessed it as gas. I think that's going to be a center of the conversation as a transition fuel, while other abatement strategies are in place before we actually reach our target renewable numbers. Fourth most, also we need to understand that ASEAN is one of those petroleum producing blocks globally that has, as a result of that, the population has largely enjoyed from a lot of fuel subsidies. And what has happened is that there's a huge ecosystem that has been built around that fuel subsidies and the demand, the benefits of those fuel subsidies, whether it's infrastructure, the equipment, the vehicles, the maritime sectors, and so on and so forth. So I think these kind of complexities, and of course, this is already, while I think it's a little bit more specific to ASEAN, is also quite overgeneralizing the whole ASEAN bloc, because unlike EU, for example, where they have the European Union to consolidate and to actually to kind of standardize economic policies, we don't have quite the same instruments in ASEAN, although we have the ASEAN bloc that is trying to put that in place very similarly. So as a result of that, integration is going to be very difficult, because where we have certain countries that have a higher amount of energy mix coming from renewables, and then you have certain countries that are prioritizing transition fuels, and then you have sectors of the population that are still, locked away from energy security, and it's quite a sizable amount. Then the question would actually kind of fall back to how we can actually shift the energy supply to actually meet the demands. And I want to come back to that question very quickly when we talk about energy supply and demand. Interestingly, in the past, from 2013 to 2023, in the past 10 years alone, regional demand for energy has gone up by more than 50%. And one of the key drivers, especially in post-COVID and lockdown, is that we've seen a huge investments coming in the form of data centers that are very much focused in Southeast Asia. And some numbers, and to drive that, is that we are actually growing in terms of number of data centers 4 times faster than any other region in the world. And that's very interesting because we're anticipating the energy demand to rise from anywhere 10 to 30% of the energy demand within in-country, depending on country, for example. We've seen AWS, we've seen Google, we've seen Microsoft, Oracle, we've seen them making massive announcements in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Thailand, in Indonesia, you name them. And that will really impact what I call the velocity of energy growth and how fast can we deploy dry powder and capital to actually meet the demand. So one interesting question, of course, I think that will be addressed later is, yes, I think while renewables have dropped in cost significantly, making it a lot more accessible. But the question is, can we get it up fast enough to run? Do we need other more accessible and fast to deploy? And when we say fast to deploy supply, we also have to think about the downstream. Can we distribute fast enough to the the economies and the industries that are already built around those traditional fossil fuels, right? And then does it mean that major retooling, a major capex of those downstream industries, which will be typically consuming fossil fuels and now have to transition forward? So those are very good questions. And of course, last but not least, I'll probably cap off my sharing is, this is also kind of like the right time to discuss about a very big elephant in the room is the plumbing that is needed to connect all these renewables together and to connect them from densely populated communities to the supply, for example. So if you look at that altogether, the doubling of grid investment and accelerating approvals now, for example, as one of them, I'm just not saying is the only factor, will not only keep the lights on, but unlock more renewable projects that are currently blocked by, for example, connection bottlenecks, considering not just the construction cost, but the connection to the grids and how, like, for example, like energy supply in renewables in Borneo, for example, can be transmitted to Singapore, for example. So we have the BIMP PIP that's going on at the moment. We have LTMS PIP, which are transboundary kind of transmission projects that are going on. Is there going to be more G2G sort of investments that are going to help facilitate the transmission of energy between the various energy supplies and mixes within ASEAN? So I think that will be a very, very major conversation that it cannot be done by the B2Bs. It has to be done at the G2G level, and then that cascades down to the B2Bs to implement with the right kind of funding, because these are obviously very large fundings that can only be facilitated by public financing or public-private partnerships, for example, and it's not for any one individual company to take on alone. It requires a lot of muscle. So I think those are my 2 cents worth of sharing about the local landscape in ASEAN.
Thanks, Sean, to give us like brief introductions about like the current landscape in ASEAN, and then also mentioning the importance of like the explosive energy demand growth and also like the current developments on those like G2G level collaborations. So let's move on to the next speaker, Lauren. Hi. And then perhaps like you can focus on the findings about the future share about fossil fuels in ASEAN energy system, because like the message from the report is pragmatic. Fossil fuels are not disappearing overnight, but either should they remain static. What are your views towards about it?
Thank you very much. Really a pleasure to take part in this and for S&P Global Energy to support EI's work whatever way we can. It's really important. We got an advanced peek to the report. It's really an important report, and the conclusions, I think the way you've done it by surveying, professionals across industry, comes up with some pretty interesting conclusions. I think this basic, what you mentioned, Melody, the pragmatic transition where fossil fuels are going to play a role for a long time, that's something we definitely agree with in the ASEAN region. The renewables will grow inevitably, and there are challenges to that the 2 previous commenters focused on. But for a long time, we have gas and we have coal in the mix. Now, I want to focus a little bit on this gas versus coal, because if you look at sustainability and energy transition, obviously growth of renewables is one thing, potential nuclear, but also the balance between gas and coal is critical, because gas so lower carbon fuel. The plan right now for most of the ASEAN countries is to meet this incredible demand growth that we're going to see. Dr. Sean, you mentioned this already, that this is already a region with growing demand, unmet energy needs, pretty strong economic growth. And then you add to that the data center boom and what that's going to do to electricity demand. So to meet this demand growth, the plan is, generally speaking, across the region, increasing renewables on the one hand, but then also increasing gas-fired power and not increasing coal very much. So that's, I think, really important for sustainability. There's some, I think, countries now are, in some cases, are looking at this again and thinking about it from perspective of cost. You know, one of the clear conclusions from the survey was that energy costs and affordability is really, really critical. There's actually some sort of pessimistic views about that. And coal, of course, traditionally is cheaper than gas. So I want to just give a little bit of good news on the natural gas side, which is taken from our long-term and medium-term global gas and LNG price outlooks, which is that prices are coming down. We've had a period of 4 years with very high natural gas spot prices, very high JKM prices, the LNG benchmark in Asia, as all of you know, and all of you know the reasons for that. And now we're coming out of this. We have a boom of LNG capacity surging from the United States, from Qatar, from a lot of other countries. And this is going to bring, in the next couple of years, it's going to bring the market into balance. And then beyond that, it's going to bring a lot of supply on. So this year, particularly the United States, but not only the United States, we're seeing almost an unexpected boom in final investment decisions for more liquefaction projects. So there is a lot of LNG coming onto the market this year, next year, 27, 28, all the way to the end of the decade and really early into the next decade. So this is going to make gas much more affordable. And cheap coal, if you're in Indonesia and you're a massive coal producer, coal is obviously still going to be cheaper than gas for power generation, but gas is going to be more competitive. There's challenges with this as well. If you're a gas producer, revenues for gas sales are going to be lower, and it's going to be important to keep up the investment that's required for the national oil companies and gas companies in this region to achieve that. But the key message is that the price environment for the sort of medium term is going to be very supportive of sticking to the plans and sticking to the key part of the sustainable energy development of this region, which is building out gas for power generation at the expense of coal. Now, I'd like to highlight one also other problem or question here, which is gas turbines. So the large scale CCGT turbines that are needed to build gas-fired power plants, there's too much demand really in the United States. And so there's this sucking sound coming from the United States where all the gas turbines are going to the US. And as many of you in the business in Southeast Asia will know, when you try to order some new turbines, you don't hear, sure, we'll get it to you next year, we'll get it to you in 2027. You're hearing dates far beyond that. So that's going to be a real challenge, and that's a bit of a constraint. So that's something I think it really has to be the focus of utilities and governments, is how to overcome this and how to do whatever is possible to get access to those turbines. The problem is going to solve itself, but not immediately. And I think that's all for now. If we can come back later to some of the more discussion of renewables and financing renewables, that'd be great. But I'll pass it back to you for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Naren, for the good news about the price of gas is going to be comparable, and what a good news, but at the same time, technology and whether there is like a available CCGS turbine that could enable us really using the gas is really a problem. Maybe let's pass to Kinga to reflect. Any reflection from your side?
Thank you. So many, but maybe just a couple of points. what's really interesting for me in this year's result is this almost equal split between caution and optimism, maybe realism and idealism when it comes to both emission reduction targets and renewable energy goals. So it was nearly 50-50 split. Why it's interesting for me is having worked on earlier energy barometers in other regions. This contrast is quite striking. So, for example, 2 years ago, we asked very similar question to energy professionals based in the United Arab Emirates, and they were somehow more optimistic. So, more than 60% of United Arab Emirates energy experts expect targets to be met or exceeded versus 46% in ASEAN. But in the UK, we asked the same question a year ago, and the opposite was true. So over 70% thought policies would fall. So given the current policies, and the targets will fall short. So ASEAN sits right in the middle. Which, in my opinion, it reflects that the region recognizes the challenges, but sees real possibility for progress. And one more point drawn from a whole series of findings, energy efficiency. So it kept coming up again and again across the survey questions, where the respondents were talking about protecting consumers from price shocks or helping the fossil fuel sector to adapt to the changing world, or identifying priority investments. Energy efficiency repeatedly emerged as either top priority or one of the favored solution. And again, this is not an isolated result. I've seen it. I've seen the same pattern in previous energy barometers. So energy professionals from other regions consistently recognize efficiency as this powerful tool which we have to strengthen affordability, security, and sustainability. Yet, despite this repeated recognition, the real-world progress remains below expectations. So sometimes the respondents refer to energy efficiency as the low-hanging fruit, but somehow it's difficult to pick it. So that's my main observation.
Thanks, Kinga. I think like the previous discussion, more focusing on the cost or also the financial consideration. There's some good news, like the gas prices is going down, but picking up some of the points like Sopian mentioned before, like financial definitely one of the barriers, but at the same time, regulation uncertainty will be, as we factor in the survey, can be as big as an obstacle as the cost. So my questions to all of you, you guys can jump into decide who to start as the first one. In your view, what can governments do to give investors more like long-term stability so that they don't need to care so much about the regulation barriers, and then at the same time to keep the space open for the innovation? Anyone want to go first? Okay, I picked Sopian.
Okay. Thank you. First, I would like to begin a lot of research areas that you can basically look into. But to me, the research areas has to be more deeply into the financial aspect, into the techno-economic aspect, and so forth. And with that, I think, coming back to the survey, I think the regulatory uncertainty is almost as big as the barrier, like the cost. So in ASEAN, most investors are not afraid of technology risk, because they basically goes into technology risk. What they are afraid of is that actually when there is sudden policy shift, inconsistent rules. What else? They are afraid of fragmented regulation across the countries. This is what they're afraid of. And so the question is that how do government provide long-term stability while keeping space open for innovation? Number one, I think it should be clear. We need a clear and stable long-term signal. Now, remember that nowadays, every government is, going for 3 years policy. It was before long-term policy. You're talking about 10 years policy, 10 years roadmap. But nowadays it's just like, 3 years and 3 years. But I think we should go back to the, those 10 years roadmap and to be consistent. For example, how to achieve renewable in certain time, how to implement the storage, how to have hydrogen technology and so forth. Within that, also how inclusion of even nuclear technology. So it has to be, number one, it has to be a long-term, a clear and stable long-term policy, long-term signals. And number two is that the tariff will be predictable. I mean, if you want to have innovation, the tariff has to be predictable, and you have to have a sort of a transparent power purchase agreement framework. So, and secondly, I think in order to improve this investor stability and support innovation, that I think the government must design market that reward flexibility. So not just in any generation, but also in terms of innovation in new energy technology. So I think what ASEAN need is actually a good storage system, a fast demand response, and of course hybridization of all the renewable energy systems. It should be based on cost effectiveness. It shouldn't be based on what do you call it? Just the technology itself. It should be based on the market. Yeah? So this means that the investors will not only what do you call it? Not only come if the market actually pays for these services, but they also are very comfortable in terms of a very real clear signal for it. I think, and then finally, I think we need also to include the use of AI, AI in this optimization. So I think it's the right time that we introduce it, so that the market becomes more flexible thing. So and thirdly, to get this investor stability and improve innovation is that we have to address this regional regulatory fragmentation. Today, even ASEAN has different ASEAN countries have different codes, different incentive, different technical standards. But of course, the ASEAN power grid is there. We have been doing it for the past even 20 years. That when we are short in demand, we'll ask from Singapore, we'll ask from from Thailand, and vice versa. So, but we need to basically look into where research institution can play a role, whereby they can provide the best model on how to do it. And then this stability, I think, shouldn't come out of in the expense of innovation. We should provide more money into it. We should also look into new technologies. For example, we should go into hydrogen. We should go into microgrids. We should go into small modular reactors, nuclear reactors. And we also should look into innovation in terms of how to basically look into how to to make sure that the cooling for these data centers is done at a very optimum way. Now, I know that, for example, data centers, the standard now is that the power usage effectiveness is around 1.6 or to 1.9. But in China, they are looking into 1.2 power usage effectiveness. And we have started a program at UTP whereby we look into how to cool data centers. And we are targeting about 1.12. Yeah. So probably that will take us probably next year for us to announce it. But anyway, so that is how I see that government can improve investor stability as well as to support innovation. It means that funding for research has to be ongoing, and the clear policy has to be there.
Yeah, thanks, Sopian, to mention about the importance of the research can help on the government or regulatory to break the barriers on those long-term signals, and also the transparent on the tariff, and also the AI. So who want to be the next?
Maybe I'll cover the next the follow up to that, and I think Prof. Kamaruzzaman has covered quite a few things. I'll just fill in the gaps from there. I think there's two parts of the question, right? One is on technology and the other one is on the policy. So I think maybe I'll cover on the technology very quickly before I dial back to policy. Okay, let's talk about policy. Before we talk about that, maybe we set the context by looking at the geopolitical stability in the region. I think ASEAN is very thankful that we're not exposed to geopolitical conflicts in the region. But what is definitely pervasive is that ASEAN has also seen a lot of political change within the landscape, and with that, there's something, with a 4-year election cycle that significantly affects the stability of policies. You can sign a lot of things. There's no guarantee that after the four-year term that we will continue to be a signatory to that, right? So I think that unification is something that people tend to debate about. So I will come back to that very quickly in a while, because some of these conversations have been spoken recently when I was in the OECD conference, and also there were representations from Asian Development Bank. So I think you know where I'm alluding to on that front. The other part I would like to talk about is first on the technology before I dial back, is we look at technology at two parts. One thing is for sure, I think Laurent has put up a very good point, is that transitional fuels are here to stay for quite a while, right? Whether it's gas or even the older fossil fuels like coal, for example. And then there's also the renewables, which now take up almost 30% of our energy mix in ASEAN. So I think the other equation that we have to put in is our pathway to net carbon zero, right? And that kind of has to go hand in hand. So while renewables already kind of kill two birds with one stone by providing that kind of renewable energy mix, and also the pathway to net carbon zero, there's also a huge innovation question about how do we continue to make efficient these existing transition fuels like gas, coal, and reduce the impact to what you call it, the net carbon zero goals. So that is one area by itself where innovation, although there is a lot of innovation looking forward at the front end, there also needs to be innovation that looks at the back end or the legacy infrastructure altogether. Efficient, I would say it's not an official English word, but efficientizing that process, right? Making efficient the process. Now, that's on one part. Then there's also, we look at policy and planning, right? So I won't quote any specific company or country or anything like that. There have been anecdotal references when during the AI boom that happened in 2022, when there was a huge flurry of investments, and there was already like advanced knowledge there will be an energy demand spike in the country. There was also kind of like a disconnect that regulators and also governments could actually play to connect the growth of new supply to data centers. So one missed opportunity was that during the construction of certain gas pipelines in the region, and the location of data centers were not aligned. And what ends up becoming is that those data centers feed off the grid, which also has a coal mix, a very significant 50% coal mix in the country's energy supply. And that itself is something that the country already has to fight against by design. Right from the get-go, and it was not coordinated from the beginning. So I think before we even go to policy, there could also be a strategic planning of infrastructure and resources in the country, and to align themselves by design rather than, oops, we cannot build a data center. What do we do now, right? That's one. Further down the road, then we also need to look at the way subsidies are structured. So I think like, for example, like Malaysia, I come from Malaysia, so I can quote on that. I think that's a very good job by the Malaysian government to retract subsidies on blanket fuel subsidies. But then how is that being redirected, and how is that being reallocated, for example, to support these new energy mixes, for example, and to perhaps incentivize these new energy mixes to come into play. So it's really about redirection and making sure that these subsidies become targeted in incentivizing this mix even further. That's on another part. And the third part is looking at distribution. So I want to cover a little bit on distribution component over here. Like it or not, an interesting fact about ASEAN is that we are home to one of the most number of vehicle ownerships in the world, and vehicle ownership really drives the demand for fossil fuels in the region, right? Barring Singapore, which is very efficient, the rest of ASEAN really depends on their cars, right? So what happens really there is, one of the transitions that we see, and China has done a really good job on it, is that they have transitioned to EV infrastructure. And if you look at the distribution of power to EVs, one of the biggest blockages, I'm just quoting a very simple example, but you can kind of scale the problem from there, is that 80%, no, I was sorry, 70 to 80% of most ASEAN nations live in urban areas, and primarily in high-rise apartments. And these high-rise apartments existed even before the EV boom, right? And what happens is retrofitting this infrastructure and to ensure that electrification of these apartments, so that these large consumers of fossil fuels can transition away to more efficient sources of power, becomes a very different problem. It's not a problem of the supply, it's a problem of getting it down to, for example, to vehicle owners, for example. And, you know, I'm a home buyer for myself, for example. I'm a homeowner, I live in an apartment. And we couldn't even get the House Owners Association to agree that we need to spend at least like $500,000 ringgit to upgrade our apartment infrastructure so that we can accommodate EVs, because there's at least half the apartment says, hey, I still got a fossil fuel car, I'm not going to pay for that, you know? And that becomes a very new problem, or it could be an innovation challenge for people to take up, right? How do we serve and make the pathways for low carbon energy to reach into the market? So all of these, I think as you can see, they kind of interplay with each other. It's not just government policy by itself. It's not just technology, but also how they correlate together to actually deliver value to market. So I'm just going to stop there very quickly, just to give space for other comments and thoughts.
Yeah, that's a really good point to talk about, like the strategic planning of infrastructure and resources in the country, so that to enable all of the other things that could happen. Lauren, anything you want to supplement?
Sure. Yes. Well, the two previous comments are very valuable. I'm see what I can add. I think all this, the planning, the grids are critical. But I think for the renewables, there's a wide range of renewables, and a lot of them are mentioned in the study. But the key to energy transition is really solar PV and batteries. And here ASEAN, like the rest of the world, benefits from Chinese overcapacity. So this is kind of at the core, and EVs is another part of that, as Dr. Sean mentioned. So I think grappling with these issues, first of all, is there security of supply issue, relying on all these Chinese products? I'd say probably not. It's very different than being like Europe was, finding itself at the end of a gas pipeline from a neighbor that suddenly became quite hostile. That's put energy security at the top of the agenda around the world. Sometimes I worry that it gets applied incorrectly to dependence on something like importing solar PV cells from China, which I don't think is going to be an area where political leverage would be used. But the probably more important thing is developing your own industry. It's not great to import everything you need for the energy transition from China, and I know this is a key issue for all these countries. It was a key issue for the U.S. government, and the Biden administration, the previous administration, had a plan to address that, and now that's been set aside. But it has to be done smart. I mean, local content rules, I know there have been some issues with this in the region. You know, those have to be applied in a very, very intelligent and careful way. If all you're doing is ensuring that you don't have you don't have solar PV, you don't have batteries if they're going to be imported. Unreasonable local content rules that can't really be implemented are worse than having nothing at all. So that's a real critical challenge for the region. How to support solar, of course, is really critical. And as we know, Vietnam is the leader in ASEAN with solar PV deployment far greater than everyone else. But how it got there was a bit chaotic. And I think the lessons learned from that are important. So Vietnam, it's a huge success in terms of deployment, but I think auctions rather than feed-in tariffs are now the standard that should be adopted. And of course, it has to be coordinated with the grid. And then finally, rooftop or distributed solar is another really important thing. What's beautiful about this is that in some jurisdictions outside ASEAN, we're seeing this happen naturally, without anything, without feed-in tariffs, without subsidies. Now, to be fair, rooftop solar boom in, for instance, Pakistan, or you're seeing it even in parts of Africa, Nigeria, South Africa. These are countries where the grids are a much bigger problem, and the reliability and effectiveness of the grids are a much bigger problem than in ASEAN. So that's a driver in those countries for small businesses, house owners to really almost partially defect from the grid and go to rooftop solar. It's not precisely the same situation, but there's take advantage of this Chinese overcapacity, take advantage of solar PV capacity there, maybe import some of the components and start to build the final cells yourself, as India has done, is doing quite successfully, and policies to incentivize that, not through subsidies, which I think are increasingly not going to be needed, but through coordination with the grid are going to be critical. The more renewables, the more you have renewables boom, especially if it's distributed, the bigger burdens this puts on the grid, on distribution networks, et cetera. Fortunately, all these countries have policymakers that I think are ready to meet these challenges. Just watching what's happening in the United States with the data center boom, where there's also a lot of very smart people trying to figure out how to deal with it, but you have a system with different regional operators, and it's very, very chaotic system. It's very difficult. If you look at how the power sector of the United States is dealing with the AI boom, it's getting there, it's going to get there, but it's very, very chaotic. So I think in ASEAN countries, there's a chance to do things in a more planned, careful way that's going to lead to better results.
Yeah, thanks, Lawrence, to bring about the industry's importance and also some natural systems to kind of like incentivize like the adoption of renewable energy, and also some kind of like strategies like feed-in tariff, or power purchase agreement, etc., to sort of like incentivize the market to also adopt it. But at the same time, I just have a follow-up question, because we received advice from the attendee, Hugh Lee from Oxford, because some ASEAN countries are still building new coal-fired power station because they lower capital cost than that of new renewable power. I know gas is going to be comparable in the price as compared to the coal one, but renewable energy is sort of like the issues that we still have to investigate. So maybe from your point of view, Lauren, maybe do you think like how can investor in the OECD, including those like pension fund, can be encouraged or incentivized to invest in new renewable energy in ASEAN countries instead of just getting government or support?
Well, the ASEAN is, I think, well set up to create what you have in a lot of other jurisdictions, which is it has the human infrastructure you need. That's what you need, is human infrastructure. You need bankers, you need a bunch of lawyers, you need a bunch of regulatory experts on the basis of stable policy, and that's the way you create just a machine that can turn out projects. And that's what we've seen in the U.S. with solar and wind. Policy support's relevant there as well. But if you look at the U.S. LNG boom, that's because you've got a capital markets, integrated with all of the services you need, and it's just producing project after project after project. So, and ASEAN has the human resources to put that into place. But as you know, both of the other commenters have emphasized, it needs stable policy.
Yeah, and of course, just to add on to that, I think we also have to kind of take into cognizance that the unique position of ASEAN, which is very close to East Asia, and East Asia has built the entire power generation infrastructure around gas. So I think this is also, again, this is my opinion, but I feel like this is also an economic market capture approach for ASEAN to capitalize on, where other parts of the world may not be able to so competitively compete upon. So it may not just be driven by our local demand, but also by exports, economic exports as well.
And I think this issue of coal that I started out with, you know, it's a tough one because affordability is key, and even I've spoken of this coming period where at least spot prices for LNG and for gas are going to be quite low globally. You know, in a lot of jurisdictions, coal is going to be cheaper. So governments have a decision to make, you know, on that affordability versus sustainability spectrum. And I don't know the answer. Governments and policymakers will do that, you know, on their own. But, you know, it needs to be thought through very carefully from an energy security point of view, as even traditional exporters in the ASEAN region are becoming importers to a certain extent. It needs to be thought through very carefully. And I don't know where it's going to end up. We see very, very strong gas demand growth in ASEAN. It's really one of the drivers of global LNG demand growth for the medium term and into the long term. And I think that's good for the climate, rather than building out more coal. But it's a challenge for policymakers, and you know, and in a global context where, as we know, largely because of my native country, the United States, the mood music for climate action has changed a little bit. So I don't think that should really change the policy drivers that ASEAN countries have set for themselves, but you know, we'll see.
Yeah, thanks for the supplementary information. I think Lawrence just covered what I want to ask in the next question, because you just mentioned energy security is the key issue. And because of the energy security and affordability continues, all these are driving the fossil fuel use in ASEAN. So my follow-up question is to all of you. Maybe Lauren just mentioned about like policymakers have like the key role to play, but which actors do you think, policymakers, industry or utilities or investors, do you think are the best place to address the concern while still pushing the energy transition forward? And what do you see as the main barrier to expanding our definition of secure and affordable energy for the region? Don't tell me like all of them are important. Just pick one.
I'll
go ahead, Prof. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll go first. I'll go the easy one. The first actor would be the policymakers, because I know this one thing. Yeah. If you look at Malaysia, for instance, we have a very good energy policy. I mean, we come up with brilliant energy policy because we have good policymakers. The only problem is that after 5 years, when we look at the result, for example, there was one policy that we say 5% renewable, right? When you look at it, at the end of the day, it's only 0.01% electricity, renewables 2 degrees. Yeah, but they have very good policy because and then remember that there was one time in Malaysia in 3 years we have 3 prime ministers. We come up with 3 energy policy, and they are brilliant. Yeah, and the latest one was the energy transition towards 2050. So here I think one of the actors, be it change in what a political leadership you have, the policymakers are really consistent in trying to push the agenda of net zero and everything. And the last plan that they came in Malaysia was a brilliant one. That basically come up with a quantitative way on how to achieve net zero by 2050. Of course, the addition of this coming of this new data center and everything, they have a lot of issues with it. How to get the baseload? The baseload cannot be from natural gas, cannot be from solar. Yeah, there's no way. So so there is also a tendency to go for for getting the best what do you call it, baseload from nuclear. So that is the question that need to be asked. But again, to me, the policymakers are one of the actors that is very important, because they really are the one that move the what do you call it, the policies and the implementation of it. Whether it is successful or not is a different story. So we can see that why is that the policymakers are the one who actually set the direction to travel. And they are very consistent with the world view on it. For example, if now most of us are talking about net zero, and they incorporate that net zero in that particular policy. I'm referring to the latest one that you have in Malaysia. And when I look at Indonesia have the same thing too, because they have good policymakers. Thailand, they have the same thing too. And but Indonesia requests that not 2050, I want 2060 to be when we achieve net neutral. So, but it's there. So I'll let the rest who are the drivers, but I guess my first drivers are the policymakers. Sorry, the actors.
Maybe I'll go next. Thanks, Prof. And I'll give a very cheeky answer, and just to lighten the mood as we are approaching towards the end of the day here in Malaysia. I'm going to say an important actor is Energy Institute. All right. And I feel like, for example, in the region, and this is where we can, because we are all Energy Institute members over here, right? Of course, there's going to be policymakers, investors, there's going to be technology providers, asset operators, regulators. So rather than going down those answers, I'd like to also maybe do a call to action, since we are all Energy Institute members over here. What can we do to facilitate and play a role to actually move the conversation and move the needle forward? And using, like, for example, Energy Institute Malaysia, I think we are very proud, together with the close support and leadership from London, that we have got one of our first corporate members in ASEAN through PETRONAS over here. And PETRONAS plays a very, very pivotal conversation in ASEAN on the energy transition piece, and also the energy security piece as well. What we really want to do is then, how can EI then use those variables and pieces to facilitate roundtable conversations? How do we support human capital development? I think something that we didn't talk about today is human capital development, right? Before human capital development, there's these forums like what we're having today: awareness, advocacy, providing white papers, providing advisory support, and providing facts, data, numbers, guidelines. Even the energy barometer that we have today is a super useful guide for people to put, rather than going by gut feel, we put it by facts and figures, so that we can move based on data-driven decisions, right? And I think this is the kind of ecosystem that Energy Institute can really play, because we're a neutral body, we're a learned society. We can really play that useful role to congregate vested interests. I would say, like, everyone will have their own interests, but we as a neutral body, a learned body society, we can play that very, very crucial role. And of course, Energy Institute collaborating with Hong Kong, collaborating with Singapore, intends to be the staging point for the wider ASEAN. As you can see, we don't have Energy Institute in Thailand, not in Indonesia, not in Philippines, and these are very fast emerging regions. What about China then? How do we then leverage our already very extensive body of knowledge into these regions and uplifting the conversation, right? So I know it may not be the most important actor in the room, because everyone is important, but I like to make this as a piece for call to action for all our Energy Institute members here on the call today.
Sean, you just set up a very difficult position for Lauren to supplement.
Okay, since we haven't, I just want to say a few words about nuclear. So I would say that not just policymakers, but heads of state, because the nuclear issues get decided on that level. And I think nuclear should be, and kind of has to be, part of the picture for ASEAN. but it's not, and everyone likes to talk about small modular reactors, and I would caution there, absolutely, don't count on it by 2030. Maybe don't count on it by 2035. I mean, this is going to be a long time coming, and I think that there's been a bit of a, I mean, it's not a coincidence. I don't think that the big tech companies, which used to have these very strong commitments, if you go back a couple of years and you look at, won't name any names, but the big tech companies that are involved in the data center business, they had very strong commitments to have only zero carbon energy by 2030. And real, I mean, they had hourly matching, which means you're committing to have clean energy procurement for each hour in the same quantities that you're using it in the same region, which is very, very hard. It's easy to say, well, we're going to buy clean energy and buy a certain amount and then use a certain amount and say you're clean. Well, hourly matching is the gold standard. And it's not a coincidence, perhaps, that as they realized they were going to back away from these targets because they're in a race for AI dominance and to build a presence in that sector, all of a sudden they started talking a lot more about small modular reactors, sort of to say, well, we're not going to be 100% renewable, but look, we've got this solution that's zero carbon called small modular reactors, and then don't say too loudly the fact that it's probably not going to be, ready in 2030. So there's a bit of a hype around small modular reactors, but they are coming. They are part of the solution, but I don't think ASEAN can, and nor is it waiting. So then you've got the traditional nuclear, larger scale, and then you've got the traditional suppliers. And that's where heads of state come in, because, it becomes extremely political. We've already mentioned that this is a region with geopolitical stability, but you still have sharp elbows being thrown around when you're trying to build and you're talking to the Russians, you're talking to the Chinese and the French and the Koreans, whatever. So those are delicate things. I'm sure the heads of state in this region can sort all of that out and proceed, but it's a heavy burden, because these are not small reactors, they're big reactors. You're going to go initially with one provider. And that's politically tricky. And I know that so far Vietnam seems to be furthest along, at least in discussions and cooperating with Rosatom. So, is Russia a reliable long-term partner? Maybe from the European perspective, no, but I know perceptions may be quite different in the ASEAN region.
Thanks, Lauren, to talk about the nuclear. I think one of the audience also asking the question, like, which ASEAN country will be the first to adopt nuclear, and by when will the first plant to be realistically operating? So are you trying to conclude it to be the Vietnam, or any thoughts in your mind?
I will leave that to the other two commenters because I don't know. I'm not going to hazard a guess.
I think it'll be Malaysia. Malaysia will be the first.
Malaysia will be the first.
Just a slight comment is sidetracking a little bit from what Lauren just mentioned, and I think on the data center piece, I think we are also seeing that data centers are also investing a lot of effort to actually make more efficient their their data centers, either through more efficient AI models or through more efficient semiconductor chips that are being deployed in the centers. But I think we're also seeing a secondary opportunity. This kind of aligns with ASEAN. I know it's not really related to the energy barometer, but it creates a secondary opportunity. So they have a lot of initiatives to buy either nature-based credits or CDR-aligned credits moving forward. And this is kind of like a secondary market that ASEAN can capitalize upon, because ASEAN is also home to one of the largest nature-based carbon sinks globally. And of course, there's also a lot of opportunities for afforestation to generate CDR-aligned credits. So I think with the maturity, and I had this conversation with Melody when I was in Hong Kong very recently, I think with the maturity of carbon trading markets, carbon transboundary frameworks, carbon trading exchanges in the region, that could create a secondary sort of opportunity for ASEAN to be involved in, while also advancing the net carbon zero sort of conversation. So just a little bit of sidetracking over there. Yeah.
Melody, if I can add as well. So just following on the nuclear question, we had a question in our survey. I just didn't present it today, but we had a question about the nuclear. So when we asked the respondents, when considering the potential role of nuclear energy, what conditions should be met, and a majority of our respondents, and this is as well fits into your previous question, majority of our respondents stated that the nuclear could be viable if strong regulations and safety systems are in place. And then it was followed by the response that the sector's viability depends on greater public acceptance in trust. So we asked, and then as well responding to the question, which country would be first? Maybe Malaysia, maybe some others, but then we had a few interviews from Singapore, and they were as well very optimistic or very stressed the importance of nuclear in the future mix in their country.
That was an interesting quote. I read that where I'm not sure it was optimistic. It was like, we have no choice for clean energy, but nuclear, just because of space constraints, which is fair enough. I mean, the beauty of nuclear is that it's reliable, zero carbon power. And then we can get into a question about to what extent is that, because right now that's the gold standard, everybody needs it, everybody wants it. And so then the question becomes energy storage, and energy storage also was a big topic. And I think there was one survey question where that was the #1 answer. I don't remember the question. And so and I'm not a technologist who's going to say anything interesting about this, but how quickly does the energy storage costs come down, and can they solve the problem of having firm power from intermittent sources, and how fast does that happen? How quickly do prices come down? I think at a certain point there's you start to have some constraints from the laws of physics, but battery has come down a lot, and this is another one where the supply chains are dominated by China, and it's much harder. I mean, for solar, it's easier to get into the supply chain and build a domestic industry. For batteries, really, really, really tough. Partnership, outside the ASEAN region with Korea and Japan are leaders in this space, but with higher costs than Chinese. So another key area.
Yeah, Lawrence, like energy storage was actually identified as the top priority, followed by the modernization of the electricity grid. So my follow-up question on this topic would be like, how should ASEAN prioritize like these technical solutions to maximize renewable energy integration? I know, Lauren, you're not the technical guys. Maybe we can pass the questions to Sopian and Sean's to like address the energy storage issue.
I really okay. The future is that you're going to have a system whereby, imagine this, in some of the transition plan that we have, by 2040 you are going to have about nearly 40% of the four-wheeler and the the four-wheeler and the two-wheeler will be EV. And the next issue is that they're going to be charged at night, and they require some base load. Yeah. So where you are going to get the base load? And if you look at some of the solar farm operators in Malaysia, they have a special program now. They call battery energy storage system, right? Whereby they use some of the excess power to store, but that excess power is not for the use of the local grid. They're not selling it to the grid. They are using it for themselves the next day. It happened to be when there's no sun. Yeah. So to me, it's quite a challenge to get to get this sort of technology on. So therefore we have to look at the whole system itself, because our system is based, our electrical system is based on a very, what do you call it, firm baseload. If we don't have that, that means nothing will work. At the end of the day, we will not achieve our net zero. If we use, let's say, natural gas, or we use even coal for our baseload. So that's what I look at it. That's number one. Number two is that whenever we talk about energy, we always talk about electricity. We never talk about energy in the form of heat, in the form of cooling and everything. Everything we talk about is electricity. Sometimes I always tell our Ministry of Energy, you are not the Ministry of Energy, you are Ministry of Electricity, because they talk only about electricity. But energy comes in different forms. And storage also come in different forms. They come in mechanical form, they come in batteries, which is electrochemical, and they come also in what they call it thermal storage. Yeah? And you can see now the usage of thermal storage is quite rampant, especially when you look about district cooling, when you look about cooling of facilities. So I think we when we talk about energy, we also should talk about energy in its different form. So not only electricity, but also in terms of in terms of other form of energy, cooling, heating, drying, that really requires a lot of energy, and that does not need electricity as a primary mover for it. You can use solar, you can use other form of energy to basically look into it. And you look at within ASEAN, there are renewable energy. For example, we have a lot of we have a lot of biomass. We have a lot of I would call it geothermal, especially in Indonesia and also in Philippines, and also solar in many of the countries. So we have to look that into a much bigger perspective. So therefore, we can, when we talk, only then we can talk that we will talk about storage in different form. There is also storage in terms of hydrogen. Hydrogen is also a storage mechanism. Yeah? So therefore, I would like to look into discussion on more on this, that energy is not only in the form of electricity, but also in other forms. So I think that's my thought of it. So talking about, and that come when you talk about that, the technology for storage come also in different forms. As I said earlier, it can come in the form of mechanical, it can come from thermal, it can come in the form of electrochemical or chemical process. So that's my thought about this, the technology advancement in this particular field. And I agree. I think I also would like to ask. I also like to look into it. Maybe I'll discuss this later. On the target of 35% renewable. Is that viable or something? Maybe we can talk about it later. I don't know, because I have some comment on it.
Yeah, we can talk about it today, though. I'll mark it down and give the question to you again.
Okay.
Right. Maybe I'll go next, but I'm also quite mindful of time as well. So I'm just going to keep my answers quite straightforward. So I think the top two answers that was given in the survey was energy storage and also modernization of the electricity grid, right? If I'm not mistaken. So, and I think question is which is the priority. So just to go back to the root question, I think if you ask me, they should be treated as a single sequence program rather than competing priorities, and that's really important because if you look at a sensible sequence, right? If you look at that, you might want to look at first observability. I think there's something that we don't recognize on the ground, and a very, very practical problem is the ability to observe the grid and the kind of tools that we have to observe the consumption in the grid and where there's pockets of supply and demands are. You will find that a lot of these legacy infrastructures are not really well equipped yet to actually retrofit, or have not started their retrofitting journey of understanding where these pockets of demands and supplies should go to. So once that is or once that observability can be addressed, then I believe that the energy storage can only then be deployed where it really adds value, or where people would really need them. For example, there are congested areas where there's lack of supply, where there are easiest pockets to actually displace, legacy decentralized systems, for example. That's one part. The second part is also looking at, for example, distribution systems, right? So while we talk about energy modernization of the electricity grid, we also need to talk about distribution, right? So like, again, I go back to the problem earlier. If you look at the statistics, 23% of electricity supply in ASEAN comes from residentials, and we expect a surge from that if, like, say, for example, the EV, which vehicles, the transition of vehicles, which was one of the largest fossil fuel consumers in the region, transitions to EV, then we're going to see a very big surge in the residential consumption. And that, what does that mean? Modernization of the infrastructure won't just be at the grid, it will be also at the distribution, it will be down to the low voltage supplies to homes, the local transformers. And how does the business model actually look like in order for this to be sustainable? For example, when I was recently in Hong Kong, I got to know from someone in PwC who said more than 60 to 70% of the infrastructure in apartments or in homes to support this energy transition from fossil fuels into electric vehicles is subsidized by the government. And if without that, it will be very, very difficult to actually deploy this renewables mix into the market, or also as well, or cleaner energy into the market, and to get the vehicles to transition away from fossil fuels. So I think there's three parts to it. There's two parts to my answer over there, and more or less those are my 2 cents.
May I jump in? Professor Sopian mentioned biomass. Can I just jump in on that point? Because that's one thing, the just transition and, supporting the energy for the poorest people in the region is obviously a key priority for governments. And this really is, it's so important, because when you're using traditional fuels in your home, forget about everything else. It's extremely bad for your health. And so I think this is, I don't know to what extent it's a policy priority. I know in other regions people talk about it a lot, and some things are happening, but to come up with business models or ways of government support that allow the poorest families to transition from traditional fuels to LPG, is going to be a huge thing. It's a small part of the whole system, but for those people, it's really important. That's sort of the traditional fuel part of biomass. In terms of, renewable biomass, I would just caution, I know there's a lot of different forms of this, and some of them are great, but burning wood and calling it renewable, which is in Europe, there's a lot of wood being burned. And here in the United Kingdom, where I'm sitting, we've got a former coal plant, Drax, that now runs on wood pellets. First of, and it's considered renewable because these trees are sooner or later going to release their CO2 into the atmosphere. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, number one, to call burning wood renewable, and number two, even in a place like Europe, where there's very high levels of regulation and compliance and all of that in theory, you're still having people chopping down trees. They're supposed to be using the waste from logging, but you still have chopping down trees and burning them, which is not good, and it's not renewable. So I would caution that as a key part of any energy strategy in the ASEAN region.
Thank you so much for your insight. I think we have to jump over to the open Q&A section, but I will go back to the question that Sopian, you want to ask yourself. And then maybe we can start with the first question from the chat box. Like, I think we briefly touched upon on the hydrogen. The question is about, what do you think will be the future of green hydrogen production and the role in decarbonizing heavy industries such as steel production and aviation? Anyone want to be the first one? Better start with the first one.
It's gonna, to do, deep decarbonization of certain industries. There's a debate. I mean, a couple of years ago when the hydrogen boom of at least people talking about hydrogen was at its peak, people would say, well, there's certain industries you can only decarbonize with hydrogen. There's pushback on that. A lot of people now will say anything can be electrified. I don't know the answer, but I think what's happened in Europe is that there was a boom of hydrogen, and now there's sort of reality has set in, and it's because of the costs. I mean, green hydrogen is a great solution to a lot of issues and a great way to decarbonize if money is no problem, and if you could just subsidize everyone with enormous amounts of money. I don't think that's really the approach for ASEAN, number one. And number two, even in Europe, but certainly in ASEAN, that last 10% of decarbonization, so taking the really difficult to decarbonize sectors and decarbonizing them, that's not the priority. Let's focus on the first 90% and worry about decarbonizing difficult to decarbonize industries later. I mean, I think that's a globally applicable solution, which certainly applies to ASEAN as well. Now, there's something called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism in the EU, which has sustained some criticism recently, and there's a lot of comment and there's pushback from the United States, which Europe has to listen to for reasons we know. And so I think there's some uncertainty as to how the CBAM will play out, but and that the purpose of that is to say, you steel producer in the ASEAN region, if you're going to export your product to Europe, you're going to have to pay for the carbon that's in there. I think that can be solved by targeting other markets, and then maybe hoping that CBAM implementation is made somewhat more flexible, which is something that Europe is trying to figure out how to do and whether to do, but I think something will happen there. But in general, this is the last, don't focus on the last leg of decarbonization. Don't focus on the hardest part right now, I would say.
Sopian, are you going to supplement on the hydrogen?
No, I already said so by Lauren. Thank you.
Okay, so I think the follow-up question, same on hydrogen as using hydrogen as an energy storage has a lower LCOE, leverage cost of energy when compared to the batteries, even though efficiency is lower. Yeah. The question is about, do you think the conversion of the renewable energy to hydrogen as energy storage could have a lower leverage cost compared to the batteries, even though the efficiency is lower? Maybe, Sopian, did you do the calculation before?
I saw the question just now, but I'm okay. There is a software called Homer. What you do is that you can always use the Homer. This is a software that basically configure the same system, hydrogen system that has the hydrogen storage, and also a system that has battery as storage, and then you do the LCOE. I've not done it before, but I guess that it's still cheaper for the battery storage than the hydrogen storage, and it depends on what type of electrolyzer that you use, whether it's the PEM electrolyzer or it's the alkaline electrolyzer. The cost is like triple but still yet I think the cost will be much cheaper if you use battery than you use it. But I've not done the simulation yet, but my feeling is that it's still more expensive as opposed to using batteries.
Oh, there's so many follow-up questions about the cost issue. Yeah, let's move on to the next one. It's just a follow-up. If electrolyzers are used for stored energy, renewable energy needs to be balanced throughout the day, at least to keep them in hot standby. As this is normally done using wind at night, why is this not mentioned as a transition technology in ASEAN? Wow, who is going to take this difficult question? Who would like to try to say
Well,
something on
Well,
this.
I mean, the question meant, I'm going to not answer the question, but I'll say something else. The question mentions wind, and we haven't talked about wind, but of course, wind is, is an important part of the picture. Offshore wind is tough. Offshore wind is expensive, and cost of capital becomes really important, but onshore wind is more straightforward. And that's obviously part of the solution. And then, of course, when you're layering, if you just have solar, then you get energy when it's sunny. But if you're layering solar and short duration battery storage and then wind, then you're starting to get closer to, you're starting to address the intermittency problem a bit. So wind is obviously part of the picture.
And then the next question is about what if we added the carbon cost into the unit price? The approach could promote sustainability and reflect the true environmental impacts of our choice. I think this is like the common questions nowadays, that everything needs to add like a price tag for the carbon. What are your viewpoints towards about it? Maybe I need to pick one of you to answer.
No, I have to go to the software, do my calculation first, then I can tell you. But I suspect there are many things for you to do we call it many sort of modification and innovation for you to make the LCOUs lower. That can be done. Yeah. But I cannot answer the question. But
maybe I'll chip in a quick answer onto that if I can help. So I think carbon costs, passing on a carbon cost for less efficient fuels has always been, energy mixes has always been a talking point in locally as well. But I think there's a lot of practical considerations. And one of the dominating themes is that has been a lot of industries that has been built around the legacy infrastructure, again, like say the fossil fuel industry, per se, whether it's for exports or whether it's for local consumption. And that then trickles down to a lot of small, medium enterprises. And, trickle down economics, I mean, the reality of it is that what happens is that the cost, is taken on by the main contractor or the main service provider and is passed down the value chain to everybody else, right? So the ones that get really hit very badly are ultimately the small, medium enterprises that has to cushion the cost, or the end user that has to cushion the cost, right? I think there needs to be systematic transition for the supporting infrastructure and the industries that have revolved around the legacy before we can even talk about putting a carbon cost into it. So I think that's my 2 cents. It's just like, for example, if you look at nuclear, for example, if you want to transition to like molten salt reactors, which are totally different technology from the boiling water reactors, the BWRs, the legacy infrastructure, then the way uranium is enriched, the way operating philosophies of nuclear reactors, the entire industry has got to change first. So in very similar vein and fashion, that will be a massive capex exercise. It's not just as simple as deploying carbon costs. But that's my humble opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Sean. And I mean, I'm very sympathetic to an argument that's been made by David Victor, who's a professor in California, who's written about this. And his point is that carbon pricing is like, that's the economist solution. You take some economists, you send them into a room to solve the problem, and they say, we'll put a price on carbon. But in practice, having the same carbon price for every different sector doesn't really work as well as one might hope. And what he would say is, you need to have different industries address carbon in their own way, with regulations, with coalitions. The IMO is decarbonizing. Well, it's trying to decarbonize shipping. That's a good example of an industry. There's not putting price. I mean, actually, going to be some huge fines if the U.S. hadn't stopped it. But sector-specific industrial policy and regulation is more effective, says David Victor, and I, to the extent I understand his argument, I agree, than a flat carbon price for every sector and every industry.
Here we got one more question about Is ASEAN energy sector ready for the skill revolution needed to deliver the energy transition? If not, what skills gaps urgently needed address?
Okay, that question I can relate to question number 6 and number 7, which Kinga has presented before. The question was that what are the likelihood that we can reach net zero? Well, I think 51% believe that will not happen. 51% believe that will not happen. Yeah, 42% believe that it will meet and will exceed. That's good. Yeah? And to answer the question is that yes, some of the ASEAN region, some countries in the ASEAN region are ready for that. They have already devised policy. They have already put forth policies. They have already put forth roadmaps for that. I know of a few countries. For example, Malaysia has put forth a net zero 2050. Indonesia has done that. Perhaps Thailand has done that. So this is there. The planning is there. And next, next is the question: will ASEAN reach 35% renewable energy by 2030? So this is quite an interesting. 42% said that it will meet the target. 8% said it will surpass, whereas 46% it will fall short. But I think the question is this: if 35% means capacity, if you include hydro, it's already there. It's already there. But if you say electricity generation, I don't think so. We have that 35% by 2030. Even in Malaysia, you know, our electricity generation, in terms of capacity, we're already there. But in terms of electricity generated, it's difficult because these have capacity factors. Solar has capacity factors. It means that they don't operate 24 hours a day, right? So wind also has similar things. So I don't know. It is quite to me. It's quite what do you call it? Surprise to me that it can be reached. Yeah. In addition to that, this has to be, this is a good thing. Yeah. That if it means here capacity, that means we're already there. Because if we include our hydro and everything, we're already reaching that by 2030. In fact, in some ASEAN countries, for instance, in Malaysia, we're going to phase out coal altogether by 2030. So that was the plan. Eh? So back to you, Melanie. I think with this 35% thing.
What are the other skills gaps that you think? Yeah.
Oh yeah. When we do our what do you call it? When we do our roadmap, we already account for that. How the training of people, education, and so forth was really in there. So I don't see that's an issue.
Yeah, Malaysia representative said no issue in Malaysia. How about the other region?
Just a quick answer. Sorry, Kinga, you have something you want to? Oh, okay. Maybe just a very quick answer to that. So I think while we are thinking about the ASEAN's energy sector's readiness, I'm sure that there will be a lot of answers on that. Maybe I also want to expose what are the downstream sectors that will spawn out from the boom in the energy supply and demand also as well. And I think what we are seeing is also ASEAN has also become a hotbed to utilize a lot of the energy infrastructure. And what that means is that it will also be the upcoming center for a lot of startups that will be utilizing that energy demand. So we're not just, so I think rather while looking at one part is the upstream, how we generate power, what the skills required to support the growing energy demand and also the delivery of that demand. Is also about the industries that will then spawn out from there and all the equivalent skill sets that we need to support those GDP raises, right, for the country, right? So and then to that effect, we are looking at a lot of potentially technology and innovation startups to actually benefit from this excess in or an increase in energy supply.
Absolutely. There's software. The ASEAN's very well positioned to have startups in the software space. I mean, everybody knows. I mean, it's sort of a cliche to talk about how AI is going to solve a lot of these problems, but there will be startups elsewhere and in ASEAN that come up with software or AI-based solutions to the problems of intermittency and managing the grid that are going to, be great investments for whoever funds them and make certain people a lot of money and also help the energy systems of the region.
And I just want to add to that and really echo what Dr. Sean said earlier about the role of EI, so not only for the convening discussions and organizing round tables, but with regards to any skills gap. So this is what's central to the Energy Institute's mission, the professional development. And we are very grateful for our branches in Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, for working hard to build the skills and capabilities that are needed for the transition. We recently launched and are very excited about the Energy Institute student chapter at the University Teknologi PETRONAS with Professor Sopian and his colleagues, Professor Sherina Nordin and Professor Zahida Nisa. So the focus on the next generation is very important for us. And absolutely what Sean as well said about the initiatives such as the energy barometer and also the statistical review of what energy to stress that the energy transition is not only about ensure that the energy transition is not only technologically sound, but socially inclusive and informed by shared regional insight.
Yeah, we don't have too much time to cover all the questions from the open Q&A. Maybe just one final words from all the panelists to share, and then we can wrap up the entire discussion today. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first so I don't have to go last. I thought it was a very interesting discussion. I learned a lot from, first of all, the surveys and the report, which I read, and then also the comments of Professor Sopian, Professor Sean. So I really appreciate it, the conclusions we've come away with.
Thanks for that, Lauren. Maybe I'll go next. I think there's one last point I kind of like. It's not really a concluding statement, but it's one last point that I wanted to bring up at the beginning. I kind of forgot about it. I think it's timely that I cover this before the session ends. Is regarding about long-term policy and political stability in order to see some of these policies that last throughout different government machineries, right? And I think one thing that we kind of overlook that is a significant advantage in ASEAN is the strength of multilateral cooperations in the region, particularly with the presence of very strong development banks in the region like ADB, Islamic Development Bank, ISDB, where they can play a very significant role across multiple political machineries to ensure the sustainability of policy and the projects that are funded through these sort of multilateral sort of arrangements. So, for example, whenever, like, I give a very simple example, whenever you have a transboundary sort of power cable or submarine cable that has been constructed, and if that is being funded by a development bank and is collateralized against government assets over, like, say, 10, 15 years, 20 years, depending on the concession, and then an SPV that's working on it, then the likelihood of governments to backtrack on that will be significantly much, this incentive to backtrack on it will be much lower, and that will introduce a lot of stability. And I think involvement of these kind of development banks and the strength, in fact, these two development banks I just mentioned, ADB and ISDB alone, is responsible for deploying nearly $50 billion of dry powder in infrastructure development in the region. And I think we should know how to actually bring them into the equation too. And I'm sure they are part of the equation, but increasingly get them to be involved to support the energy transition. So one last point to bring about stability across multiple political systems.
Sopian.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, when we first discussed this particular survey, I think it was in the Energy Institute, I mean, about 2 years ago. But I was quite reluctant to do this as what's the result. But when the survey was done and the result was being made known, I can see that this particular thing is very, very important in terms of trying to alert our decision makers, our industrial players, and many stakeholders in the ASEAN region to look at this. That the thinking of the people now is very, very advanced. They know what they want. They look things into a much broader global perspective. Yeah? So I hope that this particular survey can be really studied by taken by various of these government agencies to look into this is the way forward for ASEAN and for the region. Thank you.
Kenga, anything want to supplement?
So from my side, only again, huge thank you to all those who completed the survey and committed the time to answer all the questions. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, and as well for those who agreed to being interviewed for more in-depth insights. So thank you very much. This was our first survey in this part of the world, but not the last one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also take the time to thank you all of our panelists today, and all who are joining online today. It's hard for me or for all of us to cover everything, but please do take a look on the full report up on the Energy Institute website, and also the link shared in the chat box. And post all your thoughts about Barometer on social media. Tag us Energy Institute with the hashtag Energy Barometer. The next big event to share thoughts, ideas, and success in the energy transition will be at International Energy Week in February 2026. We hope to see you there. No more online, physical. Stay in touch, follow us, subscribe, and if you want to be the first to hear about more events like this, then join Energy Institute. Like Dr. Sean mentioned, join Energy Institute. It's the key way for you to do energy transition. For now, it's time to say thank you and goodbye. Hope you guys have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Bye.